The night my own son threw me out of the house, it was already past 10 p.m. I was standing on the front porch with a small suitcase at my feet when Ethan slammed the door in my face. "You're just a useless mouth to feed, Mom," he said coldly before the lock clicked from the inside. His wife Madison stood behind him, arms crossed, watching like she had finally won something. The porch light flickered above me while the neighbors' windows slowly lit up. I should have been begging to come back inside, but I didn't. Because the strange part was this. They believed they had just kicked me out of their asterisk house. The truth, legally, the house had never belonged to them. Not even for a second. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I always find it incredible how stories like this reach people all around the world. If this story already made your heart tighten a little, please consider liking the video so more people can hear it. And if you enjoy emotional real-life stories like this one, you're welcome to subscribe and stay with me for the rest of the journey. I'd also really like to know your thoughts. Have you ever seen a family fall apart over money or property? Because what happened after that door closed behind me changed my life forever. If you had walked past our house on Maplewood Drive 20 years ago, you would have seen the kind of home people imagine when they think about the American dream. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was ours. My name is Barbara Brown, and that house had been my entire world for more than 3 decades. My late husband Frank and I bought it when Ethan was just a little boy. Back then, the neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio was quiet and full of young families trying to build something stable. Frank worked long shifts as a mechanic at an auto repair shop, and I worked as a nurse at Riverside Hospital. We weren't rich, not even close, but we believed in working hard and living honestly. Every dollar we earned went into that house. I still remember the first night we slept there. The floors creaked. The walls smelled faintly of fresh paint, and the kitchen only had 2 working lights. But Frank stood in the middle of the living room with his hands on his hips and said something I'll never forget. "Barbara," he said, with that proud smile of his, "no landlord can ever tell us to leave again." At the time, that sentence felt like security, like safety. I never imagined it would become something else entirely. Ethan grew up inside those walls. He learned to ride his bike on the cracked sidewalk outside. Frank built him a treehouse in the backyard that leaned slightly to the left, but somehow survived every storm for 15 years. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every scraped knee, and every teenage argument happened under that roof. For a long time, we were a happy family, but life has a way of changing things quietly. Frank passed away 8 years ago. A sudden heart attack while he was mowing the lawn on a warm June afternoon. One moment he was fine, and the next moment everything in my world collapsed. After the funeral, the house felt unbearably quiet. Every room echoed with memories. Frank's tools still sat neatly arranged in the garage. His coffee mug stayed in the cabinet for months before I could bring myself to move it. At night, I sometimes caught myself listening for the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't scream all the time. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you. For the first few years after Frank died, it was just me in that house. And honestly, I was okay. I worked part-time at the hospital, spent time with friends, and kept the garden Frank loved alive in the backyard. The roses he planted along the fence still bloomed every spring. Then Ethan called one evening. I could hear stress in his voice before he even said hello. "Mom," he said, "I'm having a rough time." Ethan had been working in sales for a logistics company in Cleveland. Apparently, the company downsized, and he lost his job almost overnight. His savings didn't last long, and rent in the city was eating through what little he had left. He told me he just needed a place to stay for a little while. Of course, I said yes. He was my son. A few weeks later, he moved back into the house he grew up in. At first, it actually felt nice having someone around again. The silence was gone. The kitchen lights stayed on later at night. Sometimes we even watched old movies together the way we used to. But things changed when Madison entered the picture. Ethan had been dating her for about a year before I met her. She was pretty confident and very direct. The first time she came to dinner, she brought a bottle of wine and complimented my cooking. "Mrs. Brown," she said warmly, "Ethan talks about you all the time." I remember feeling relieved. Maybe this would bring some happiness back into our lives. 6 months later, Ethan told me they were getting married. The ceremony was small, just a courthouse wedding with a few friends. They didn't have much money, and I was happy to help where I could. I even let them convert the guest room upstairs into their bedroom. At first, Madison seemed grateful. She would ask if she could rearrange furniture or add decorations. She called the house charming. Sometimes she even helped me water the garden. But slowly, almost so slowly I didn't notice at first, something began to shift. The changes started with small things. Madison redecorated the living room one weekend while I was at work. When I came home, the old couch Frank and I bought together had been pushed into the basement. "I hope you don't mind," Madison said casually. It just didn't match the aesthetic. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Furniture was just furniture. Then came the kitchen. Madison reorganized the cabinets and pantry. Suddenly, I couldn't find my coffee filters or the spices I had used for years. "It's more efficient this way," she explained. Ethan didn't say much during these moments. He mostly shrugged and told me Madison had a good eye for design. But what bothered me wasn't the furniture or the cabinets. It was the tone. Little comments began slipping into everyday conversations. "You know, Barbara Madison said once while we were eating dinner, houses like this are worth a lot now. If someone really managed the property well, they could probably double its value." Another time she looked around the dining room and said, "With the right renovations, this place could look completely different." She said things like that more and more often. At first I thought she was just making conversation. But one night I heard something that made my stomach tighten. It was late and I had gotten up to get a glass of water. As I passed the hallway, I heard Madison and Ethan talking quietly in the kitchen. "We can't stay stuck like this forever," Madison was saying. Ethan sighed. "I know. You told me this house would eventually be ours." There was a pause. Then Ethan said something that made my heart skip. "Once we refinance, things will be different." I stood frozen in the hallway, the glass trembling slightly in my hand. Refinance. No one had mentioned refinancing the house to me. I went back to my room that night with a strange feeling in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like the uneasy sense that something important was happening around me, without me. Looking back now, that was the moment everything began to change. Because from that point on, the house that Frank and I built together slowly stopped feeling like my home. At first, I tried to convince myself that what I had overheard that night didn't mean anything serious. People talk about finances all the time, I told myself. Maybe Ethan and Madison were simply worried about their future. Maybe they were dreaming about renovations or planning something practical. After all, young couples often think about improving the places they live. But the uneasy feeling in my chest didn't go away. In fact, it slowly grew stronger. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere inside the house began to change in subtle ways. Madison started taking control of things that had never been hers before. One Saturday morning, I walked into the living room and noticed that several framed photos were missing from the wall. They were pictures of Frank and Ethan over the years, family vacations, birthdays, the day Ethan graduated from high school. I found them stacked carefully in a box near the stairs. "Madison," I called. She appeared from the kitchen holding a cup of coffee. "Oh, those," she said casually. I moved them. The wall looked cluttered. I stared at the box for a moment. "They've been there for 20 years, I said quietly. Madison shrugged. "Well, styles change." It wasn't what she said that hurt. It was how easily she said it. Later that same week, another small change happened. When I came home from my shift at the hospital, I discovered that my bedroom door had been replaced with a newer one. Madison was in the hallway with Ethan when I noticed it. "Oh, we updated the door," she explained quickly. "The old one was squeaky. But when I tried to open it, I realized something else had changed. There was now a lock on the outside." I looked at Ethan. "Why does my door lock from the outside?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "It's just a better lock, Mom." I didn't argue then. But a cold feeling crept through me. A few days later, Madison brought up money at dinner. We were sitting at the kitchen table eating pasta when she cleared her throat. "Barbara," she said carefully, "we've been reviewing the household expenses." I looked up from my plate. "What expenses?" "Well, Madison continued utilities, groceries, maintenance. Things like that." Ethan avoided my eyes. Madison folded her hands neatly on the table. "And we think it would be fair if everyone contributed." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "Contributed?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "living costs." I stared at her. "I've paid the property taxes on this house for 35 years. Madison smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, but things are different now." "Different." That word echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. Over the next few days, the tension continued to build. Madison started making comments about groceries. She labeled shelves in the refrigerator. One afternoon, I opened the fridge and saw small sticky notes. E&M, shared, do not use. I stood there for a long time staring at those labels. In my own kitchen. The kitchen Frank and I had remodeled ourselves 15 years earlier. That night, I decided to talk to Ethan privately. He was sitting on the couch watching television when I walked into the living room. Ethan, I said gently, can we talk? He muted the TV. What's up? I sat across from him. I'm starting to feel uncomfortable in my own house. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? Madison is labeling food in the refrigerator, I said. She's talking about me contributing financially. And you mentioned refinancing the house. Ethan leaned back and crossed his arms. So, I'd like to understand what's going on. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he sighed. Mom, you're overthinking things. I don't think I am. He rubbed his face with both hands. Look, he said Madison and I are trying to build a life here. I understand that. But this house is, well, it's old. It needs upgrades. And refinancing would give us the money to improve it. Us. He kept saying us, as if the house already belonged to them. Ethan, I said slowly, this house was paid off years ago. I know. Then why would we refinance it? He hesitated. Because it could help our future. That uneasy feeling returned. Your future, I asked. Our future, he corrected quickly. The conversation ended shortly after that. But a few nights later, something happened that made my stomach drop. It was nearly midnight when I woke up to get a glass of water again. The house was quiet, but as I walked down the hallway, I saw a faint light coming from the kitchen. Madison and Ethan were sitting at the table. Papers were spread out in front of them. I stopped before they noticed me. She doesn't understand how things work, Madison was saying. Ethan looked nervous. She's still my mom. Madison leaned forward. And if she signs the document, we solve everything. My heart started beating faster. What if she refuses? Ethan asked. Madison's voice hardened. She won't. There was a pause. Then she added something that chilled me. And if she does, we'll deal with that too. At that moment, the floor creaked beneath my foot. Both of them turned toward the hallway. Barbara Madison called. I stepped into the light. I was just getting water, I said. Madison quickly gathered the papers into a neat pile. Actually, she said, smiling too brightly, there's something we wanted to talk to you about. Ethan avoided my eyes again. Madison slid one of the papers across the table. We just need you to sign something, she said. I looked down at the document. The page was full of legal language. Small print. Official stamps. My pulse quickened. What is this? I asked. Madison folded her arms. It's just paperwork for the house. Paperwork for what? Ethan spoke quietly. Refinancing. I picked up the document and scanned the first few lines. Most of the terms were confusing, but one phrase caught my eye immediately. Asterisk, asterisk, property. Transfer authorization dot, asterisk, asterisk. A strange chill ran through my body. Why would refinancing require me to transfer property rights? I asked slowly. Madison's smile faded. Barbara, she said impatiently, it's just a formality. Something inside me told me not to trust that answer. I placed the paper back on the table. I'd like to read it more carefully first. Madison's expression hardened. There's nothing to read. I'll take a look tomorrow, I said calmly. Then I walked back to my room with the document still in my hand. As I closed the door behind me, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Ethan and Madison were planning, it wasn't just about renovations. That night I didn't sleep. The document Madison had slid across the table sat on my nightstand, the pages glowing faintly in the dim light of the lamp. Every time I closed my eyes, the phrase I had seen near the top of the page kept repeating in my mind. Asterisk, asterisk, property transfer authorization dot, asterisk, asterisk. I wasn't a lawyer. I'd spent most of my life working as a nurse, not reading legal contracts. But even without understanding every word on that page, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something about it felt wrong. Around 2 a.m, I picked up the document again and tried to read it more carefully. The language was dense, full of terms like asterisk grantor, asterisk dicum beneficiary, asterisk and asterisk interest conveyance asterisk. The more I read, the more confused I became. But the confusion slowly turned into something else. Concern, then fear. Because buried in the middle of the page was another phrase that stood out clearly. Asterisk, asterisk, Transfer of ownership rights. ****. My hand started to shake. Why would refinancing a house require transferring ownership? It didn't make sense. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Ethan had already left for work, and Madison was upstairs getting ready for something. I heard the sound of her hairdryer through the ceiling while I sat at the kitchen table staring at the document again. When she finally came downstairs, she noticed the papers immediately. "You didn't sign it," she said. Her voice carried a trace of irritation. I wanted to understand it first, I replied calmly. She opened the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of orange juice. "There's nothing to understand," she said. "It's standard paperwork." "Then why does it say *transfer of ownership*?" Madison stopped pouring. For just a second. Then she continued like nothing had happened. "That's just legal terminology," she said casually. I looked directly at her. "I'd feel more comfortable if a lawyer explained it." Madison turned around slowly. "A lawyer," she repeated. "Yes." Her expression hardened. "That seems unnecessary," maybe I said quietly, "but it would make me feel better." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Madison leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "Barbara," she said, "Ethan and I are trying to make responsible financial decisions for the future. Bringing lawyers into it complicates things." I felt my stomach tighten. Complicate things for who, I asked. Before she could answer, the front door opened. Ethan walked in looking tired and distracted. Madison immediately turned toward him. "She wants to take the paperwork to a lawyer," she said. Ethan looked at me. "Mom, why?" "I just want to understand it. It's just refinancing," he said. "If it's that simple," I replied gently, "then a lawyer confirming it shouldn't be a problem." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, you're making this bigger than it is." "Am I?" Madison sighed loudly. "We're trying to help this family move forward," she said. "But if you don't trust us..." Her voice trailed off. The sentence hung in the air like an accusation. I felt something inside me twist. Trust. That word had once meant everything between Ethan and me. Now it felt like a weapon. "I'm not saying I don't trust you," I said slowly. "I'm just saying I want to be careful." Madison pushed away from the counter. "Fine," she said sharply, "take it to a lawyer." Then she grabbed her purse and walked out the door without another word. The house fell silent again. Ethan and I stood in the kitchen facing each other. For a moment he looked like the little boy who used to run through this house with scraped knees and grass stains on his jeans. But the expression on his face now was different. Tired, frustrated, almost resentful. "You know, Madison is just trying to help us," he said. "I know she thinks she is." Ethan frowned. "Then why are you fighting this?" "I'm not fighting anything I said. I'm protecting what your father and I built." That seemed to irritate him. "Mom, this house could be worth so much more if we modernized it. And refinancing could give us the money to do that." Us again. The word landed heavily between us. I looked around the kitchen. Frank had installed those cabinets himself. I could still remember the weekend he spent measuring and drilling and adjusting the hinges until everything lined up perfectly. Every corner of that house carried a memory. "This house isn't an investment property," I said quietly. "It's our home." Ethan's patience snapped. "It's also a financial asset, Mom." The sudden edge in his voice startled me. "You're sitting on something valuable and you're acting like it doesn't matter." I stared at him. "When did money start mattering more than family?" He looked away. "That's not fair." Before I could respond, he grabbed his keys from the counter. "Just do whatever you want with the paperwork," he muttered. Then he walked out the door. The moment the house fell silent again, I realized something important. Neither Ethan nor Madison had actually explained the document. They had only insisted I sign it. That realization settled over me like a heavy weight. An hour later, I put on my coat and picked up my purse. Inside it, I placed the document. If Ethan and Madison thought I would sign something without understanding it, they didn't know me very well. I drove 20 minutes across town to a small office building near the courthouse. The brass sign outside the door read, ****, Rachel Nguyen, Real Estate and Estate Law, ****. I had never met Rachel before, but her office had been recommended by a friend from the hospital years ago. When the receptionist asked what I needed, I handed her the document. "I'd like someone to explain this to me," I said. A few minutes later, Rachel Nguyen herself stepped into the waiting area. She looked to be in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a calm presence that immediately made me feel more at ease. "Mrs. Brown," she asked. "Yes." "Come with me." Her office was quiet and organized. She sat behind her desk and began reading through the document carefully. At first her expression was neutral. Then her eyebrows slowly lifted. She looked up at me. Did someone ask you to sign this? Yes. Who? My son and his wife. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Brown, she said carefully, this is not a refinancing document. My heart started beating faster. It's not. No. She turned the document toward me and pointed to a paragraph halfway down the page. This is a quitclaim deed ***. The words meant nothing to me. What does that mean? I asked quietly. Rachel folded her hands. It means that if you sign this, you transfer ownership of your property. I felt a cold wave rush through my chest. Transfer *ownership to who? Rachel pointed to another line on the page. The name printed there made my stomach drop. ***. Ethan Brown ***. For a moment, I couldn't speak. They told me it was refinancing, I whispered. Rachel's expression darkened. It's not. Silence filled the office. I stared at the paper on her desk. The paper my own son had asked me to sign. And in that moment, something inside my heart cracked. Because suddenly, I understood what Ethan and Madison had been trying to do. They hadn't been planning renovations. They had been planning to take the house. For a long moment, I just sat there in Rachel Nguyen's office, staring at the paper on her desk, as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less painful. But they didn't. The name was still there. ***. Ethan Brown ***. My son. Rachel watched me quietly, giving me time to process what she had just explained. Her office felt suddenly too small, too quiet, as if the air itself had grown heavier. I want to make sure I understand, I said slowly. If I had signed that document, Rachel nodded gently, you would have transferred your ownership of the house to your son? My throat tightened. Completely? Yes, she said. A quitclaim deed transfers all of your interest in the property. Once signed and filed, the house would legally belong to him. For several seconds, I couldn't even breathe properly. I thought about the kitchen table the night before, Madison sliding the paper toward me, Ethan sitting beside her without saying a word. They hadn't explained anything. They had just told me to sign. Could they have sold the house after that? I asked quietly. Rachel didn't hesitate. Yes. The room felt like it tilted slightly, and I would have had no rights to it anymore. That's correct. I pressed my hands together in my lap to stop them from shaking. I see. Rachel studied my face carefully. Did they tell you what the document was? They said it was refinancing paperwork. Rachel let out a slow breath. That's not accurate. Her careful choice of words didn't soften the reality. They had lied to me, not by accident, not by misunderstanding, but deliberately. I felt something painful rise in my chest, something deeper than anger. It was heartbreak, because the person who had asked me to sign that document wasn't a stranger. It was the little boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The child I had stayed up all night with when he had a fever. The young man whose college tuition Frank and I had worked overtime to help pay. Mrs. Brown, Rachel said gently. Do you currently live in the house? Yes. With your son and his wife? Yes. She nodded slowly. Then you should know something else. I looked up. If they are pressuring you to sign legal documents under false pretenses, that's a serious problem. I swallowed. They've been pushing harder lately. Rachel folded her hands. Have they threatened you? No, I said quickly. Then I hesitated. Not exactly, but I stared down at the floor. They've been making it clear that I'm not really welcome anymore. Rachel's expression softened. That must be incredibly difficult. I forced a small smile. It's strange, I said quietly. You raise someone for 34 years and then one day you realize you don't recognize them anymore. Rachel didn't respond immediately. Instead, she picked up the document again and placed it back into a folder. First, she said calmly, do not sign anything they give you. That won't be a problem. Second, she continued, make sure you keep the original deed to your home somewhere safe. It's in a lockbox. Good. She paused. And one more thing. Yes, if the situation at home becomes hostile, you have legal rights as the property owner. The word *owner* sounded strange in my ears. I had never thought about the house that way. To me, it had always been a home. Rachel must have noticed the look on my face. You don't seem like someone who enjoys conflict, she said. I don't, but sometimes protecting yourself requires standing firm. I nodded slowly. The truth was, I had spent most of my life avoiding conflict. Frank had always been the one who handled difficult situations. He had been calm, practical, steady in ways that balanced my tendency to give people the benefit of the doubt. Without him, I had tried to keep the peace wherever possible, even when it meant swallowing hurt, even when it meant pretending not to notice certain things. But what Rachel had just shown me wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. And suddenly, the uneasy moments from the past few weeks started lining up in my mind like pieces of a puzzle. Madison rearranging the house, the conversation about refinancing, the late-night meeting in the kitchen, the pressure to sign quickly. It had all been leading to that document. Rachel closed the folder and handed it back to me. "Take this with you," she said, "and if anything changes, call me." I stood slowly. "Thank you." As I walked toward the door, Rachel spoke again. "Mrs. Brown," I turned. "Yes, whatever is happening in your home right now, you're not powerless." Her words stayed with me the entire drive back to Maplewood Drive. The sky had grown cloudy by the time I reached the neighborhood. The trees along the street swayed gently in the afternoon wind, and the familiar houses looked exactly the same as they had that morning. But something inside me felt different. The illusion had been broken. When I pulled into the driveway, Ethan's car was already there. So was Madison's. I sat in the car for a moment before stepping out. Through the front window, I could see them moving around inside the living room, talking, waiting. They must have expected me to return with the signed document. I took a deep breath and walked up the front steps. The moment I opened the door, Madison appeared in the hallway. "Well," she asked. Her eyes dropped immediately to the folder in my hand. Ethan came out of the living room behind her. "Did you sign it?" he asked. I closed the door quietly. "No." Madison's smile disappeared. What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly that," I said calmly. Ethan frowned. Why not?" I held up the folder. "Because it's not refinancing paperwork." For a moment, neither of them moved. Madison spoke first. "What are you talking about?" I took it to a lawyer. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Ethan's face went pale. Madison's expression hardened, and she asked slowly. I met her eyes, and the lawyer explained exactly what it is. No one spoke. The tension in the room thickened. "It's a quitclaim deed," I said. Ethan looked down at the floor. Madison crossed her arms. "So," she said. So I replied quietly, "It transfers ownership of the house." Ethan finally looked up. "Mom." I raised my hand gently. "No." The word stopped him. "I spent 35 years paying for this house," I said. "Your father and I worked for decades to make sure it would always be ours." My voice didn't rise, but the hurt behind it was impossible to hide. "And you tried to trick me into signing it away," Madison scoffed. "That's dramatic." I looked at her. "No," I said softly. "It's the truth." For a few seconds after I said those words, the entire house fell silent. The tension in the room felt thick enough to touch. Madison was the first one to break it. "Oh my God, Barbara," she said with a dramatic sigh, throwing her hands into the air. "You are blowing this completely out of proportion." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched Ethan. He still hadn't looked at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor like a child caught doing something he knew he shouldn't have done. "Am I asked quietly?" Madison scoffed. "Yes, you are." She walked past me into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, arms folded tightly across her chest. It was a practical decision, she continued. "That house has a lot of value sitting there doing nothing. I felt something twist painfully in my chest. "That house is my home," I said. Madison shook her head. "It's real estate." Ethan finally spoke. "Mom, Madison didn't mean it like that." I turned toward him. Then how did she mean it? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence that followed felt like an answer in itself. Madison stepped forward again, clearly losing patience. "Look," she said sharply, "we were trying to create stability." "By lying to me?" I asked. Her eyes narrowed. "No one lied. You told me it was refinancing paperwork." "That's part of the process." Rachel's voice echoed in my mind. "That's not accurate." "Refinancing doesn't require transferring ownership," I said calmly. Madison's jaw tightened. "Barbara, you clearly spoke to someone who doesn't understand the situation." I almost laughed at that. "I spoke to a real estate attorney." That shut her up for a moment, but only for a moment. Madison took a step closer, her voice turning cold. "You know what I think?" she said. "I think you're scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of change." I stared at her. "You think this is about change?" "Yes," she said bluntly. "You've been sitting in that house alone for years. Ethan and I could turn it into something better. Something better." Frank's voice echoed in my memory. Asterisk. "No landlord can ever tell us to leave again." The words suddenly felt heavier than they ever had before. That house already is something better, I said quietly. Madison rolled her eyes. It's outdated. Maybe I replied, but it's paid for. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her. Mom, I turned to him. Did you know what the document was? The question hung in the air between us. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he sighed. Yes. The single word landed like a hammer in my chest. Not because I didn't already suspect it, but because hearing him admit it made it real. You knew it would transfer ownership, I asked. He nodded slowly. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Ethan rubbed his temples like he had a headache. Because you would have said no. The honesty in that answer stunned me. You're right, I said. Madison let out an irritated laugh. This is exactly what I was talking about. She gestured around the room. You're being stubborn. Stubborn, I repeated. Yes, she said. You're holding on to something that could help everyone. Help everyone, I asked. Of course. How? Madison looked at Ethan. He hesitated before speaking. We could take out equity from the house, he said. Start fresh. Start fresh where I asked. Maybe move to a bigger place eventually. And where would I live? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Well, you'd still have a place here, he said quickly. Madison didn't look so sure. I noticed the glance they exchanged. It lasted less than a second, but it told me everything I needed to know. You were planning to sell the house, weren't you? I asked quietly. Madison laughed. Now you're really being dramatic. But Ethan didn't laugh. He just looked away again, and that was answer enough. The realization settled over me slowly. They hadn't just wanted the house. They had wanted it without me. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I think I understand now, I said softly. Madison tilted her head. Understand why you wanted me to sign so quickly? She didn't respond, because if I had signed that document, I continued, I wouldn't have had any legal claim to the house anymore. Ethan shifted uneasily. That's not. I raised my hand again. Please don't. He fell silent. I took a deep breath. You know what hurts the most about this? I asked. Neither of them answered. It's not the house. Madison looked skeptical. Then what is it? I looked directly at Ethan. It's realizing that my own son was willing to trick me. His face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? No, he said defensively. You're acting like we were trying to rob you. I held up the folder again. That's exactly what this document would have done. Madison stepped forward again, clearly losing her temper now. You're making this into some kind of betrayal story, she snapped. It is a betrayal. No, she said sharply. It's business. The word echoed in the room like an insult. Business. Not family, not trust, not love. Just business. I suddenly felt very tired. Not physically, emotionally. 34 years of motherhood flashed through my mind in fragments. First steps. School plays. Late-night talks about college dreams. All the moments that had built the relationship standing in front of me now. And yet somehow we had arrived here, in a kitchen that suddenly felt unfamiliar. With my son looking at me like I was an obstacle, I placed the folder down on the table. I'm not signing the document, I said calmly. Madison let out an exasperated laugh. Of course you're not. And from now on, I added, I expect honesty in my home. Madison's expression darkened. Your home. The way she said those words made something inside me tighten again. Yes, I said. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile people wear when they've just decided something. You know what, Barbara, she said slowly. If that's how you feel. She glanced at Ethan. Then maybe we should talk about living arrangements. The words were soft, but the meaning behind them was anything but. And suddenly, for the first time, I realized something deeply unsettling. This argument wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. When Madison said the words, asterisk, maybe we should talk about living arrangements. Asterisk, the room seemed to shrink around us. For a moment, none of us moved. I looked at Ethan, hoping perhaps foolishly that he would immediately correct her, that he would remind his wife whose house we were standing in. But he didn't. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck and avoided my eyes again. That silence hurt more than anything Madison had said. What exactly do you mean by that? I asked quietly. Madison walked over to the dining table and pulled out a chair, sitting down as if we were about to conduct a business meeting. Well, she said calmly, if you're unwilling to cooperate with the future of this household, then we need to consider alternatives. Alternatives, I repeated. Yes, she said. Different living arrangements that work better for everyone. The way she said asterisk everyone asterisk sounded strangely hollow. Ethan finally spoke. Madison, maybe we should slow down. But Madison shook her head. No, Ethan. We've been patient long enough. Then she looked directly at me. You've made it very clear that you're not willing to help us build a future here. I stared at her. I gave you both a place to live when you had nowhere else to go. That was temporary, she replied. Exactly, I said. Her expression hardened. But things change. There was that phrase again. Things change. The words felt like a knife sliding slowly into something that had once been warm. Ethan shifted his weight uneasily. Mom, Madison just means that we're trying to figure out how everyone can move forward. And moving forward means what I asked. He hesitated. Madison answered for him. It means we need space to build our life. The way she said asterisk our life asterisk made it sound like I didn't belong anywhere near it. I looked at Ethan again. Is that how you feel? His shoulders sagged slightly. It's complicated. I let out a quiet breath. No, I said softly. It's actually very simple. The truth had become painfully clear over the past 24 hours. They didn't want to share the house. They wanted control of it. And without that document, control wasn't something they had. Madison leaned forward. If you're not willing to sign the paperwork, then we need to reconsider the arrangement. What arrangement, I asked. Living together. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I folded my arms slowly. You moved into my house. Madison didn't even blink. And now it's not working. Something inside my chest tightened again. So your solution, I said carefully, is to ask me to leave. Madison shrugged. It might be the healthiest option for everyone. The calmness in her voice made the suggestion feel even more surreal. I looked at Ethan. He looked miserable. But he still didn't say the words I needed to hear. Ethan, I said quietly, do you want me to leave this house? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Madison watched him expectantly. Finally, he spoke. I just think maybe some distance would help. The words landed like a blow. Distance. From my own home. From the house Frank and I had spent 35 years building together. I swallowed hard. And where exactly do you expect me to go? Madison spoke immediately. There are plenty of senior living communities. I stared at her. Senior living communities. Yes, she said, matter-of-factly. Places designed for people in your stage of life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm 62, I said. And she replied, and I'm still working. Madison waved a dismissive hand. That's not the point. What is the point? She leaned back in her chair. The point is that Ethan and I need room to build our future. I looked around the kitchen, Frank's kitchen, the same cabinets he had installed with his own hands, the same table where Ethan had done his homework for years. This wasn't just real estate. It was memory, family, history. And yet somehow in Madison's mind it had turned into an obstacle. I turned to Ethan again. Is this really what you want? His voice came out quieter this time. I just think everyone would be happier with some separation. Separation. The word echoed in my head. For a moment I felt something inside me collapse. Not anger, not even sadness, just a deep, hollow disappointment. I realized then that Madison hadn't changed Ethan overnight. This shift had been happening slowly, quietly, and I had been pretending not to see it. Madison stood up from the table. Look, she said briskly, we don't have to solve everything tonight. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway. But if we're going to move forward, we need clear decisions. I watched her walk toward the living room. Then she turned back. Oh, she added casually, and since we're being honest now, you should probably start packing some of your things. The words were so blunt that for a moment I thought I had misheard them. Packing, I repeated. Yes, Madison said. Packing, she repeated, as if the word were completely reasonable. My gaze shifted to Ethan. He didn't correct her. He didn't object. He just stood there silently. That silence told me everything. Are you serious? I asked. Madison crossed her arms. Barbara, this house can't function if everyone is pulling in different directions. This house has functioned perfectly fine for 35 years. Well, she said coolly, things are different now. I suddenly felt very tired again. But beneath that exhaustion, something else was beginning to form. Something stronger. Because for the first time since this conversation began, I understood exactly what Madison was trying to do. She wasn't negotiating. She was pushing. Pushing until I either gave in or walked away. And in her mind, she probably believed I would do exactly that. Because people like Madison often assume that kindness equals weakness. But what she didn't realize yet, what neither of them realized, was that the house they were trying so hard to claim still legally belonged to me. And the moment they forgot that truth, everything was about to change. That night I packed a small suitcase, not because Madison had told me to, And not because Ethan had finally said the words that would have broken my heart completely. I packed it because I needed space to think. The house felt suffocating. Every room carried tension now like a storm waiting to break. Madison had gone upstairs after her little speech about living arrangements, and Ethan disappeared into the garage without another word. Neither of them came to check on me. Neither of them asked if I was okay. That silence told me more than any argument ever could. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room that had once belonged to Frank and me. The dresser still held the same family photos I had kept there for years. One of them showed Ethan at age 8 missing 2 front teeth and grinning proudly beside the crooked treehouse Frank built in the backyard. For a moment, my chest tightened so sharply I had to close my eyes. How had we ended up here? How had the little boy in that photograph grown into a man who could stand quietly while someone suggested his mother pack her bags? I folded a few clothes into the suitcase. Just the essentials: a sweater, a change of shoes, my medications. When I reached the bottom drawer of the dresser, I paused. Inside was the small metal lockbox that held the most important documents in my life: Frank's death certificate, insurance papers, and the original deed to the house. I lifted the box onto the bed and opened it carefully. The familiar documents lay exactly where I had left them. My fingers rested on the deed for a moment. Rachel's voice echoed in my mind. "You're not powerless." I closed the lockbox again and placed it gently back into the drawer. Then I zipped the suitcase. Downstairs, the house was quiet when I walked through the hallway. Madison's voice floated faintly from the upstairs bedroom, talking on the phone to someone. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but the tone sounded irritated. Ethan's car keys were still on the kitchen counter. The clock above the stove read 10:17 p.m. For a moment, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the familiar cabinets Frank had installed decades earlier. The room looked exactly the same, but the feeling inside it had completely changed. Finally, I picked up my purse and walked toward the front door. The porch light flickered on automatically when I stepped outside. The night air was cool, carrying the faint smell of autumn leaves from the nearby trees. As I reached the driveway, I heard the door behind me open. "Mom!" Ethan's voice. I turned. He stood in the doorway looking confused. "Where are you going?" "Out for the night," I said calmly. His brow furrowed. "Out where?" "I'll stay with Denise." Denise Carter had been my closest friend for more than 20 years. She lived just 3 streets over and had shared countless cups of coffee with me during the quiet years after Frank passed away. Ethan stepped onto the porch. "You don't need to do that," he said. "Don't I?" He hesitated. Madison's voice suddenly called down from upstairs. "Ethan, who's at the door?" "It's Mom," he replied. A moment later, Madison appeared at the top of the staircase, looking down at us. "What's going on?" she asked. "She's leaving for the night," Ethan said. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Well," she said slowly, "that might give everyone some time to cool off." Her tone suggested she thought this was a perfectly reasonable development. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked down the driveway toward my car. Behind me, Ethan called out again. "Mom, wait." I stopped and turned back. He looked uncomfortable, like someone trying to fix something they didn't fully understand. "You don't have to leave," he said. The irony of that sentence almost made me laugh. "Your wife just told me to start packing," I said quietly. "That's not exactly what she meant." "Then what did she mean?" Ethan didn't answer. The silence stretched between us again. Finally, he rubbed his face with both hands. "I just think everyone needs some space right now." Space. There it was again. "Okay," I said. Then I got into my car. The drive to Denise's house took less than 10 minutes, but it felt longer that night. Streetlights passed slowly through the windshield as my thoughts raced in circles. Part of me still hoped that Ethan would call before I reached Denise's driveway, that he would say he was sorry, that he would tell Madison she had gone too far, but my phone remained silent. Denise opened the door before I even knocked. Her gray hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore the same comfortable sweater she always did in the evenings. "Barbara," she said in surprise. "What on earth?" Then she saw the suitcase. Her expression changed instantly. "Oh, honey," she said softly. Within minutes, we were sitting at our kitchen table with 2 cups of tea between us. Denise listened without interrupting as I told her everything. The document, Rachel's explanation, Madison's comments about living arrangements. By the time I finished, Denise looked furious. "That girl has some nerve," she muttered. "It's not just Madison," I said quietly. Denise sighed. "I know." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Denise leaned forward. "Barbara, do they realize the house is still legally yours?" I shook my head. No. Her eyes widened. They don't know. No. Denise sat back in her chair slowly. Well, she said that changes things. It might. She tapped her fingers lightly on the table. What are you going to do? I stared down at the steam rising from my tea. For the past 35 years, I had tried to avoid conflict whenever possible. But something about the past few days had shifted something inside me. Madison had assumed I would fold under pressure, that I would quietly sign the paper, or quietly leave. But now the truth was out, and the truth gave me options. I'm going to call Rachel tomorrow, I said finally. Denise nodded approvingly. Good. Then she leaned closer. And Barbara? Yes. If Ethan and Madison think they can push you out of your own house... She shook her head slowly. They're about to learn a very expensive lesson. For the first time that day, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in a while. Not anger, not revenge. Something stronger. Resolve. Because Madison believed the next step in her plan was simple. She thought I would stay away long enough for her and Ethan to claim the house as their own. But what she didn't understand yet was that the real fight hadn't even started. That night at Denise's house was the first time in days that I slept without tension hanging over my head. Not perfectly, not peacefully, but enough to clear the fog that had settled in my mind since Madison slid that document across the kitchen table. When I woke the next morning, sunlight filtered through Denise's kitchen curtains, and the smell of coffee drifted down the hallway. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then everything came rushing back. Ethan, Madison, the document. The quiet realization that my own son had been willing to trick me out of the home his father built. I got dressed slowly and walked into the kitchen. Denise was already sitting at the table, scrolling through something on her phone while sipping coffee. She looked up when she saw me. Morning, she said gently. Morning. She pushed a mug toward me. Fresh coffee. I sat down and wrapped my hands around the warm cup. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. Finally, Denise broke the silence. So she said, "What's the plan?" I took a sip of coffee. "The first thing I'm doing is calling Rachel." Denise nodded. "Good. Then I'm going back to the house." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Today." "Yes." Denise leaned back in her chair. "That might get messy." "It probably will." "Do Ethan and Madison know you stayed here?" "I'm sure they guessed." "Did Ethan call?" I shook my head. "No." Denise muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. "Unbelievable," she said. But honestly, I wasn't surprised. Somewhere deep down, I'd already accepted that Ethan was choosing the easier path, the one that didn't require confronting Madison or admitting he had done something wrong. Avoiding the problem was simpler, at least for him. After breakfast, I stepped outside onto Denise's porch and called Rachel Nguyen. She answered on the second ring. Rachel Nguyen. "Hi, Rachel. This is Barbara Brown." "Mrs. Brown, how are you holding up?" Her tone carried a kind professionalism that immediately made me feel steadier. "I'm managing," I said, "but I think things may escalate." "What happened?" I explained the argument with Ethan and Madison. The conversation about living arrangements. Madison suggesting I move out. Rachel listened quietly. When I finished, she spoke carefully. "Mrs. Brown, since the house is legally yours, your son and his wife are technically living there with your permission." "Yes. And if you withdraw that permission, they have no legal claim to remain." I leaned against the porch railing. "So I could ask them to leave?" "Yes. And if they refuse?" Rachel's voice remained calm. "Then we move forward with formal legal steps." The word asterisk, legal asterisk, made something in my chest tighten again. Taking legal action against strangers was one thing. Taking legal action against your own child was something else entirely. "I never imagined things would go this far," I said quietly. Rachel didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she said something simple. "Unfortunately, property disputes within families are more common than people realize." I sighed. "Madison believes the house belongs to Ethan. Does Ethan believe that too?" "I'm not sure." Rachel paused. "Then the first step may simply be making the truth clear." I knew what she meant, but hearing it out loud still made my stomach twist. "Would you recommend I bring someone with me?" I asked. "Yes," Rachel said immediately. "If tensions are already high, it's always better to have a witness present." I glanced back toward the house. Denise was inside washing dishes. "Thank you," I said. "Of course," Rachel replied. "And Mrs. Brown?" "Yes." "Remember something important." "What's that?" "You're not the one who created this conflict." Her words settled into my mind slowly. Because until that moment, a small part of me had still been wondering if I had somehow caused this situation by refusing to sign the document. But Rachel was right. I hadn't created the problem. I had simply refused to be manipulated. When I went back inside, Denise looked up from the sink. "Well," she asked, "we're going back to the house." Her eyes lit up immediately. Oh, I wouldn't miss that for the world. I couldn't help smiling faintly. "You don't have to come." Denise dried her hands with a towel. "Barbara," she said firmly, "I've known you for 20 years. I know. And I also know you're too polite to throw anyone out even when they deserve it." She tossed the towel onto the counter. "So yes," she said, grabbing her car keys, "I'm coming." The drive back to Maplewood Drive felt different from the night before. Then I had left the house feeling pushed out. Now I was returning with clarity and something else. Control. As Denise pulled into the driveway, I saw Ethan's car parked in front of the garage. Madison's car was still there too. They hadn't gone anywhere. Denise turned off the engine and looked at me. "You ready?" I took a deep breath. Yes. We walked up the driveway together. The front door was closed, but I could hear faint movement inside. Denise knocked firmly. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened. Madison stood there. The moment she saw me and Denise beside me, her expression tightened. "Well," she said slowly, "look who's back." I met her gaze calmly. "Yes," I said. "I'm back." Behind her, Ethan appeared in the hallway. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Denise. "What's going on?" he asked. I stepped forward. "What's going on," I said quietly, "is that we need to have a very clear conversation." Madison crossed her arms. "We already had that conversation." "No," I replied. "Oh, not." "We didn't." Ethan looked uneasy. "Mom?" I raised a hand gently. Before we say anything else, I continued. "There's something you both need to understand." Madison's eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" I reached into my purse. Inside was a folder Rachel had helped me prepare that morning. Carefully, I pulled out a copy of the original deed. Then I handed it to Ethan. He looked down at the paper. Confusion slowly spread across his face as he read the first line. And in that moment, the truth that they had been ignoring for weeks finally started to catch up with them. Ethan stared down at the paper in his hands for several seconds. At first, his expression showed only confusion. His eyes moved slowly across the page, scanning the printed text, like someone trying to make sense of a language he suddenly wasn't sure he understood. Madison leaned slightly closer. "What is it?" she asked impatiently. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept reading. Then his eyebrows pulled together. Finally, he looked up at me. "What is this?" "It's the deed," I said calmly. Madison let out a small laugh. "Barbara, we already know about the house." "No," I said gently. "You don't." Ethan looked down at the paper again. His lips moved slightly as he reread the names printed across the top of the document. Then something changed in his expression. Confusion turned into realization. "Mom," he said slowly. Madison grabbed the paper from his hand. "Let me see." She skimmed it quickly. Then her eyes widened. "That can't be right." But it was. Right there in black ink, clearly printed on the official county document, were the words that changed everything. Asterisk, asterisk. Owner of record Barbara Elaine Brown. Asterisk, asterisk. Madison flipped the page as if she expected to find another name hidden somewhere. But there wasn't one. Ethan's voice came out quieter this time. "You never transferred the house." "No," I said. Madison looked up sharply. "But Ethan told me." Her voice stopped mid-sentence. She turned slowly toward him. "You told me the house would eventually be yours." Ethan looked like someone who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he believed. "I thought it would be," he said. Madison stared at him. "You thought? Mom always said the house would stay in the family." "It asterisk is asterisk staying in the family," I said calmly. "But that doesn't mean I signed it over." Madison's eyes flashed with anger. "So this whole time," she held up the deed, "you were the only owner." Yes. The silence that followed was heavy. Denise stood beside me with her arms folded, watching the scene unfold without saying a word. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I considered that question carefully. "I never thought I needed to." Madison scoffed. "Oh, please." I looked at her. "Your father and I bought the house together," I said quietly. "After he passed away, the ownership transferred fully to me." Ethan stared at the floor. "So everything we talked about, refinancing, selling, none of that could happen without my approval." Madison's jaw tightened. "You could have told us that." "You never asked," I replied. That only seemed to make her angrier. "So you let us believe something else." "No," I said calmly. "You assumed something else." Ethan finally looked up again. "But Mom, if the house is yours, then why did you act like what I asked?" like it belonged to all of us. The question caught me off guard. I took a moment before answering, because for most of your life, Ethan, this house wasn't about ownership. It was about family. Madison let out a short laugh. Well, that's convenient. Denise finally spoke. Actually, she said calmly, it's the truth. Madison shot her an annoyed glance. And who exactly are you to comment? Someone who knows the whole story, Denise replied. I stepped forward slightly. Madison, I said, this doesn't have to turn into a bigger argument. But she was already shaking her head. Oh, it's already a bigger argument. She pointed at the deed again. You brought this here to threaten us. No, I said. I brought it here to clarify something. Ethan looked exhausted. Clarify what? That this house belongs to me. The words hung in the air. For the first time since the confrontation began, neither of them tried to interrupt, because now the truth was sitting in front of them in black ink. Madison paced a few steps across the living room. Then she turned back toward me. So what now, she demanded. That depends on you. What does that mean? It means we decide how to move forward. Ethan frowned. Mom, we're not trying to fight you. Aren't you? He looked uncomfortable. Madison crossed her arms again. We're trying to build a life, and I gave you space to do that. You're holding the house over our heads now, she said. No, I replied. You tried to take it. Her eyes flashed again. That's not what happened. I didn't respond. Instead, I gestured toward the document still clutched in her hand. That paper you wanted me to sign would have transferred ownership. Madison's voice rose. That was part of a plan. A plan you never explained honestly. Ethan sighed heavily. Mom, maybe we handled things wrong. The admission surprised me, but Madison immediately shook her head. No, we didn't. She looked directly at me. You're overreacting. Denise raised an eyebrow. Overreacting? Yes, Madison said sharply. She's acting like we tried to steal something. You did, Denise replied flatly. Madison glared at her. This isn't your business. Denise shrugged. It became my business the moment Barbara had to sleep on my couch. Ethan's head snapped up. You stayed at Denise's last night. Yes. He looked uncomfortable again. You didn't have to leave. I held his gaze. Your wife told me to start packing. Madison rolled her eyes. I said we should discuss living arrangements. That's not how it sounded. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. This whole thing is getting out of control. I took a deep breath. No, I said. It's finally becoming clear. Madison narrowed her eyes. Clear how? Clear that we need boundaries. The words seemed to surprise Ethan. Boundaries, yes. I looked at both of them. You tried to pressure me into signing away my home. Neither of them spoke. That can't happen again. Madison tilted her head. And what exactly are you planning to do about it? For the first time since I returned to the house, I answered without hesitation. I'm taking my house back. The room fell silent, because the meaning behind those words had suddenly become very clear. And deep down, Ethan and Madison both understood something in that moment that they hadn't considered before. They hadn't thrown me out of my home. They had been living in mine all along. The moment I said the words asterisk, I'm taking my house back asterisk, the atmosphere inside the living room shifted completely. Until then, Ethan and Madison had still been speaking as if they had some kind of authority in the situation, as if we were all negotiating equal ground. But now the reality had finally landed. The house wasn't shared territory. It was mine. Ethan looked stunned, like someone who had just woken up in the middle of a conversation he didn't remember starting. Madison, however, reacted very differently. She laughed, not a friendly laugh. The kind of laugh people use when they think someone is bluffing. Oh, please, she said, shaking her head. You're being dramatic again. I didn't respond. Instead, I simply stood there, letting the silence stretch between us. Madison's smile slowly faded when she realized I wasn't backing down. What exactly do you mean by that? She asked. I mean, I said calmly, that things in this house are going to change. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you don't have to talk like that. Yes, I do. Madison crossed her arms again. So what's the plan? She said sarcastically. You're going to kick us out now. I took a slow breath. I don't want it to come to that. But you tried to take this house from me. Ethan immediately spoke up. That's not fair. I looked at him. Isn't it? His voice softened. We weren't trying to take it from you. We were trying to build something. With a document that transferred ownership to you. He didn't answer. Madison stepped forward. You're twisting things. No, I said quietly. I'm finally seeing them clearly. For a moment, no one spoke. Denise leaned casually against the wall beside me, arms folded, watching everything like a referee at a boxing match. Madison finally broke the silence again. "You know what this really is about?" she said. "What?" "Control." I raised an eyebrow. "Control." "Yes," she said sharply. "You can't stand the idea that Ethan and I might make decisions without you." The accusation would have stung more if the situation hadn't already gone so far beyond ordinary family disagreement. "This was never about control," I replied. "Then what is it about?" "Respect," Madison scoffed. "Respect goes both ways." "You're right," I said. That seemed to surprise her. Then I added quietly, "And asking someone to sign away their home under false pretenses is not respectful." Ethan sighed heavily. "Mom, we already admitted we handled that wrong." Madison turned to him immediately. "No, we didn't." Ethan looked frustrated. "Well, maybe we should have explained it better." Madison stared at him in disbelief. "You're actually apologizing now." "I'm trying to calm this situation." Madison let out a sharp laugh. "There is no situation if she would just stop acting like this is a courtroom." Denise spoke again. "Funny you should mention court." Madison turned toward her with irritation. "What does that mean?" Denise smiled faintly. "It means that when people try to take property that isn't theirs, things sometimes end up there." Madison rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please." But I could see something flicker in her expression. For the first time since this confrontation began, a small trace of uncertainty had appeared. And that uncertainty told me something important. She hadn't expected resistance. She had expected me to give in. I looked at Ethan again. "Tell me something honestly," I said. He nodded slowly. "When you asked me to sign that paper, did you already know it would make the house yours?" He hesitated. Then he nodded. "Yes." "Did you plan to tell me after it was done?" Silence. Madison answered instead. "We would have figured things out." I looked at her. "That's not an answer." She shrugged. "It's the only one you're getting." The bluntness of that response removed any remaining doubt I might have had about her intentions. For Madison, this had always been a strategy, a calculation. I turned back to Ethan. "And you were comfortable with that?" He looked torn. "I didn't think about it like that." "How did you think about it?" "Like we were securing our future." I nodded slowly. "And what did you imagine happening to me?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "If the house had been transferred to you, I said what was the plan for me." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Madison answered. "She would still live here." I raised an eyebrow. "Would I?" "Of course." "For how long?" Madison didn't reply. The silence stretched again, because deep down we all knew the truth. If that document had been signed, I would have had no legal protection at all. They could have sold the house, refinanced it, or simply asked me to leave, and there would have been nothing I could do about it. Denise shook her head quietly. "Unbelievable." Madison shot her another annoyed glance. "Are you done with the commentary?" Denise smiled politely. "Not even close." Ethan looked exhausted. "Can we just stop fighting for 5 minutes?" "No," Madison said sharply. Then she looked at me again. "So let's be clear about something." I waited. "You're saying this house is yours?" "Yes." "And you're planning to take it back?" "Yes." Madison tilted her head slightly. "And what does that actually mean for us?" The answer was something I had spent the entire morning thinking about. Something Rachel had also helped me understand. "It means," I said carefully, "that the current arrangement isn't working anymore." Ethan frowned. "What arrangement?" "The one where you and Madison live here." The room went completely still. Madison's expression darkened. "You're serious?" "Yes." Ethan looked shocked. "You're asking us to leave." "I'm asking you to find your own place." His voice rose slightly. "Mom, we can't just move out overnight." "I'm not asking you to." Madison stepped closer, her voice suddenly colder. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you'll need to make plans. And if we don't?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, I saw the same stubborn determination in Madison's face that had been there the night she slid the document across the table. But this time, the situation was different, because now the truth was undeniable. I held her gaze calmly. "Then the next conversation will involve lawyers." The room fell silent again. And for the first time since this conflict began, Madison didn't have an immediate response, because now she finally understood something she hadn't expected when this whole situation started. The woman she thought she could push out of the house was the only person who actually owned it. The silence after my last sentence stretched longer than any argument we had had so far. For the first time since this entire situation began, Madison didn't immediately fire back with another sharp remark. She simply stared at me, and behind that stare I could see something shifting. Not guilt, not regret, Calculation. Ethan looked between us nervously. Mom, he said carefully, you don't really mean that. I do. He ran a hand through his hair again. But where are we supposed to go? It was the first time he had asked a practical question instead of defending Madison's position. And for a brief moment, I saw the frightened little boy he used to be hiding behind the man standing in front of me. I'm not asking you to leave today, I said calmly. Madison's voice came back quickly. How generous. I ignored the sarcasm. I'm saying the situation in this house has to change. Madison crossed her arms again. And you think forcing us out is the solution? I think rebuilding trust requires space. Ethan looked uneasy. But this is still my home too. The words made Denise raise an eyebrow, but I answered before she could say anything. It was your home when you were growing up, I said, quietly. But legally, it's mine. Madison scoffed again. You really love repeating that part. No, I said. I just think it's important that everyone finally understands it. She turned away and began pacing the living room. The tension in her shoulders was obvious now. You know what this really feels like, she said suddenly. What? Punishment. I looked at her calmly. You tried to take ownership of my home. That was a financial plan. It was deception. Madison turned sharply toward me. Oh, please, Barbara. No one was deceived. You told me it was refinancing paperwork. That's how these things start. I shook my head slowly. That's not what my attorney said. The word attorney made Ethan's posture stiffen. You talked to a lawyer again, he asked. Yes. Madison laughed bitterly. Of course you did. Ethan looked genuinely worried now. Mom, are you planning to sue us or something? No. The relief on his face lasted about 2 seconds. Then I continued. But if this situation keeps escalating, legal options may become necessary. Madison's eyes flashed. So now you're threatening us. I'm setting boundaries. She looked ready to argue again, but Ethan raised his hand. Wait, he said. Madison turned toward him in frustration. What? Let's just slow down for a minute. She stared at him. You're taking her side now. I'm trying to stop this from turning into a disaster. Madison let out an incredulous laugh. It already is a disaster. Ethan turned back to me. Mom, can we just talk without lawyers and threats? That's exactly what I wanted from the beginning, I replied. Madison muttered under her breath. Right. But Ethan ignored her this time. What if we just reset things, he asked. What does that mean? It means we admit mistakes were made. I waited, and we moved forward. Madison looked at him like he had just suggested something ridiculous. You're serious? Yes, Ethan said firmly. Madison shook her head. You're folding. I'm being realistic. She stared at him. So after everything we talked about, you're just giving up? No, he said. I'm accepting reality. The tension between them was suddenly just as strong as the tension between Madison and me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Madison turned back toward me. So let me get this straight, she said. You're giving us an eviction notice. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. No, I replied calmly. I said the current arrangement isn't working. Ethan spoke again. How long? Madison turned toward him sharply. What? If Mom wants us to move out, Ethan said quietly, how long do we have? The question hung in the air. Madison looked furious. You're just accepting this. Ethan rubbed his temples. What do you want me to do? Fight it. Fight what he asked. The truth, Denise said quietly from the corner. Madison shot her another glare. Ethan looked exhausted now. Mom, he said, if we start looking for a place, could we stay here for a while? I took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine everything. Because part of me still wanted to say yes without hesitation. He was my son. For 34 years, my instinct had always been to protect him. But another part of me, one that had grown stronger over the past 2 days, knew something had to change. You can stay temporarily, I said slowly. Madison rolled her eyes again. How generous. I ignored her. But there are conditions. Ethan nodded. Okay, first there will be no more discussions about transferring ownership of the house. Fine. Second, I continued, any major financial decisions about this property will be made by me. Madison opened her mouth, but Ethan spoke first. That's fair. She stared at him in disbelief. You're unbelievable. Ethan looked at her quietly. It's her house. Those 3 words seemed to hit Madison harder than anything else that had been said all day. For a moment, she simply stood there. Then she turned away sharply and walked toward the hallway. I need some air, she said. The front door slammed seconds later. Silence filled the house again. Ethan sat down heavily on the couch. I didn't think things would go this far, he said quietly. Denise crossed her arms again. Most people don't when they start playing games with property. Ethan looked embarrassed. I know we messed up. I studied him carefully. Do you? He nodded. Yes. The sincerity in his voice was difficult to ignore, but sincerity didn't erase what had already happened. You and Madison need to figure out your future, I said. And that future can't depend on taking my home. Ethan nodded again. I understand. For the first time since the confrontation began, I believed he might actually mean it. But outside, somewhere beyond the closed front door, Madison was pacing the sidewalk with anger burning inside her. And deep down, I had a feeling this story wasn't finished yet. Because Madison wasn't the kind of person who walked away from a plan easily. Madison didn't come back inside for almost 20 minutes. During that time, the house felt strangely quiet. Ethan sat on the couch with his elbows resting on his knees, staring down at the floor as if he were trying to untangle every decision that had led him here. Denise remained leaning against the wall beside me, arms crossed, her expression calm but alert. None of us spoke. Finally, the front door opened again. Madison walked in without looking at anyone. Her expression had changed slightly, not softer but colder. The kind of cold that comes from someone who has finished thinking and reached a conclusion. She set her purse on the kitchen counter and turned toward us. So she said, I've had time to think. Ethan looked up immediately. Madison. She held up her hand. Let me finish. Her eyes moved slowly from Ethan to me. You want us to move out, she said. That's not exactly what I said, I replied calmly. You said the arrangement is over. Yes. That means the same thing. I didn't argue. Madison walked further into the living room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. You know what I realized outside, she continued. No one answered. That you've been planning this all along. Denise let out a quiet laugh. Oh, this should be good. Madison ignored her. You never intended to let Ethan have any real control over this house, she said, looking directly at me. That's correct. The bluntness of my answer seemed to surprise her. So all those years when Ethan thought he'd inherit it one day. Inheritance and ownership are not the same thing. Ethan looked uncomfortable again. Madison, this isn't helping. But she was already shaking her head. No, she said, I'm finally understanding the situation. She pointed toward the walls around us. This place has been used as leverage for years. That's not true, I said calmly. It absolutely is, she replied. You kept Ethan emotionally tied to this house because you knew it gave you power. The accusation would have hurt more if it weren't so wildly detached from the truth. I kept this house because it was my home, I said. And because Frank and I built it together. Madison rolled her eyes. There it is again, the sentimental story. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Madison. But she wasn't finished. What you call memories, she said sharply, I call wasted opportunity. Denise pushed herself off the wall. Well, that's a charming way to describe someone else's property. Madison shot her a look. You really enjoy inserting yourself into things that don't concern you? Denise smiled. Only when someone tries to bully my friend. Ethan stood up. Can everyone just calm down? Madison laughed bitterly. Oh, I'm calm. Then she turned toward me again. Let's talk about something practical. Okay. You want us to move out. I want you to make plans for your own place. Fine. She folded her arms. But let's be honest about what that means. I waited. You're choosing the house over your son. The words landed heavily in the room. For a moment, Ethan looked genuinely hurt. But I didn't react the way Madison expected, because the statement itself wasn't true. I'm choosing honesty, I said quietly. Madison shook her head. No, you're choosing control. Ethan spoke again. Madison, please stop. She turned toward him. You're really okay with this? He hesitated. No. Her eyes brightened slightly. So you agree with me? No, he said. I just understand that we messed up. Madison stared at him like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're unbelievable. Ethan sighed. No, Dinty, where? I'm being realistic. What's realistic, she snapped, is that we've spent 2 years building a life here. You've been living here, I said. That's not the same thing. Madison's voice rose slightly. You think you're so generous letting us stay. I think I was supportive. Support would have been transferring the house. The room fell silent again, because that sentence revealed something important. Madison had never seen this house as a shared home. To her, it had always been a target, a goal, an asset waiting to be claimed. Denise shook her head slowly. Well, she said at least the honesty is refreshing. Madison turned back toward me. Let's skip the emotional speeches. Okay, you want us out. I want you to build your own life. Same difference. She walked toward the window and looked out at the quiet street. Then she spoke again. You know what the funny part is? What? You think this solves your problem? I frowned slightly. What problem? Me. The bluntness of the statement caught Ethan off guard. Madison. No, she said. Let's stop pretending. She turned around again, her eyes sharp. You think if Ethan and I leave, everything goes back to the way it was. That's not what I expect. But it's what you want. I thought about that for a moment. Did I want things to return to the quiet life I had before Ethan moved back in? Part of me probably did, but the truth was more complicated. No, I said slowly. What I want is peace. Madison smirked slightly. Peace doesn't come from pushing people out. Sometimes it comes from protecting yourself. That answer seemed to irritate her even more. Ethan finally stepped between us. Enough, he said. Both of us looked at him. He looked exhausted. This conversation isn't helping anyone. Madison scoffed. It's helping her. No, he said quietly. It's helping the truth come out. He turned toward me. Mom, I'll start looking for apartments tomorrow. Madison looked shocked. You're serious? Yes. You're just giving up. I'm accepting reality. She stared at him for several seconds. Then she shook her head slowly. You're making a mistake. Ethan didn't answer. Because deep down, we all knew something important had changed that day. The plan Madison had spent months quietly building had collapsed in a single afternoon. And now the future she thought was guaranteed was suddenly uncertain. The house felt different that evening. Not quieter exactly, because silence had already lived in those rooms for years after Frank passed away, but steadier, as if something unstable had finally settled. Ethan spent most of the afternoon in the spare bedroom, probably scrolling through apartment listings or texting people he knew. I heard the occasional thump of a drawer opening or the sound of his footsteps pacing the floor above the living room. Madison, on the other hand, barely spoke to anyone. After the argument earlier, she had retreated to the backyard patio with her phone. Every so often, I could hear fragments of conversation drifting through the kitchen window, sharp whispers, irritated sighs, the sound of someone venting to a friend on the other end of the line. Denise stayed for a while, just in case things escalated again. Around 6 o'clock, she finally stood up from the couch and grabbed her purse. You want me to stay longer? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I think the worst of it is over. Denise studied my face carefully. You sure? Yes. She gave me a long look, the kind of look only someone who has known you for decades can give. You're stronger than you think, Barbara, she said. I smiled faintly. I didn't feel very strong yesterday. That's how strength works, Denise replied. You don't notice it until you need it. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly. Call me if anything gets weird again. I will. A few minutes later, her car pulled away from the driveway. The house fell quiet again. For the first time all day, it was just Ethan and me inside. I found him sitting at the kitchen table staring at his laptop. He looked up when I walked in. Hey. The air between us felt fragile now. Not angry like before, but uncertain. Find anything? I asked. He nodded slowly. Maybe. He turned the laptop slightly so I could see the screen. An apartment listing filled the page. Small, plain, but decent. It's about 15 minutes from here, he said. 2 bedrooms. I nodded. That seems reasonable. Ethan looked tired. I didn't think I'd be looking for apartments again this soon. I know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. I'm sorry. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. I sat down across from him. Sorry for what? For everything. He rubbed his hands together nervously. The document, the pressure, letting things get this far. Hearing him say it out loud loosened something in my chest that had been tight all day. I appreciate you saying that, I said softly. I should have stopped Madison earlier. You should have been honest with me. He nodded. You're right. For a few seconds, we simply sat there, the laptop screen glowing between us. Then Ethan looked around the kitchen. You know, he said quietly, I used to think this house would always feel the same. What do you mean? I mean, safe. His voice carried a hint of sadness. It was safe, I said, for a long time. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I guess somewhere along the way, I started looking at it differently. How? Like an opportunity. The honesty in his voice was painful but necessary. I think Madison influenced that he admitted. I didn't argue. Maybe I said, but the decision was still yours. He nodded slowly. I know. At that moment, the back door opened. Madison walked inside. Her expression was calm now, but the calm felt distant, like she had already stepped away from the conversation emotionally. Apartment hunting? She asked, glancing at Ethan's laptop. Yes. She walked past us toward the refrigerator. Well, she said casually that was fast. Ethan closed the laptop halfway. We need to start somewhere. Madison grabbed a bottle of water and leaned against the counter. Did you find anything good? Maybe. She shrugged. I guess we'll see. The tone of her voice was flat, almost indifferent. Not angry. Not apologetic. Just detached. It struck me then that Madison had already shifted her focus forward. The house was no longer the immediate battle. The battle had already been lost. But I had a feeling the resentment behind that loss hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone quiet. Ethan stood up. I'm going to check out a few places tomorrow. Madison nodded. Fine. He looked between us awkwardly. I think I'll go for a walk. Okay, I said. A moment later, the front door closed behind him. Now it was just Madison and me. The silence that followed felt very different from the earlier arguments. Madison twisted the cap off her water bottle. You really surprised me today, she said. How? I thought you'd fold. Her honesty didn't shock me anymore. You underestimated me. Yes, she admitted. But you also underestimated us. I raised an eyebrow. In what way? You assumed we were just greedy. Weren't you? Madison took a slow drink of water before answering. We were desperate. The word hung in the air. Desperate for what I asked. Stability. I studied her face carefully. And you thought taking my house would give you that. It would have helped. The bluntness of her answer was almost refreshing. But it wouldn't have been honest, I said. Madison didn't respond. Instead, she looked around the kitchen the same way Ethan had earlier. You know something, she said quietly. What? You're lucky. Lucky. Yes. She gestured toward the house. You get to keep everything exactly the way it was. I shook my head slowly. No. What do you mean? Nothing about this situation feels the same anymore. For the first time since the conversation began, Madison didn't have a clever reply. Because deep down, she knew that part was true. This house might still belong to me, but the family that once filled it had changed forever. The house was quiet again a few weeks later. Not the tense silence that had filled the rooms during those long arguments with Ethan and Madison. Not the uneasy quiet that followed, slammed doors and whispered accusations. The silence felt different, peaceful. It took time for things to settle after that day. Ethan and Madison did eventually find an apartment across town. It wasn't large or glamorous, but it was a place that belonged to them, one they had to pay for, manage, and maintain on their own. The day they moved out was strangely calm. No shouting, no dramatic speeches, just the quiet sound of boxes being carried down the hallway and loaded into the back of Ethan's truck. Madison barely spoke to me the entire morning. She moved through the house, quickly collecting her things with the focused energy of someone determined not to linger. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed slower, more thoughtful. When he carried the last box down the stairs, he paused in the kitchen and looked around. This place looks exactly the same, he said. But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Some things had changed. Trust once cracked doesn't magically repair itself. It takes time. And sometimes even time can't bring it back exactly the way it was. I'm glad you're staying here, Ethan said quietly. I always was. He nodded. I know. Madison called from outside. Ethan, we need to go. He looked toward the door, then back at me. I really am sorry, he said again. I know. The apology didn't erase the past, but it was a start. He stepped forward and hugged me. For a brief moment, he felt like the same little boy who used to run into my arms after school. Then he let go. Take care of yourself, Mom. You too. A minute later, the truck pulled out of the driveway. And just like that, the house was mine again. The first few days after they left were strange. Not lonely exactly, but reflective. I found myself walking through the rooms, slowly noticing small things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The scratch on the hallway wall where Ethan crashed his skateboard when he was 15. The faded mark on the kitchen counter where Frank accidentally spilled wood stain during a renovation project. The garden outside still blooming the way Frank planted it decades ago. Every corner held a memory, but now those memories felt lighter, because the tension that had filled the house for months was finally gone. One afternoon, Denise came over for coffee. She walked into the kitchen, looked around, and smiled. Well, she said, this place finally feels like yours again. I poured her a cup of coffee. It always was. She nodded. But now everyone knows it. We sat at the table for a while talking about small things, neighborhood gossip, her grandchildren, plans for the summer, the kind of simple conversations that had been impossible during the chaos of the past few weeks. Eventually, Denise leaned back in her chair and gave me a thoughtful look. You know, she said, a lot of people would have handled that situation very differently. How so? Some would have signed the document just to keep the peace. Maybe. Others would have thrown them out immediately. That crossed my mind. She smiled slightly. But you didn't. No. You stood your ground without becoming cruel. I thought about that for a moment. I didn't want to lose my son, I said. And did you? I don't know yet. Denise nodded. Sometimes people need distance to learn things. That turned out to be true. Over the next few months, Ethan called occasionally. At first, the conversations were short and a little awkward, but slowly they became easier. He told me about his new job, about fixing things in the apartment, about learning how expensive life could be when you weren't relying on someone else's house. Madison never joined those calls. I didn't expect her to, and honestly, I didn't need her to. The important thing was that Ethan was beginning to understand something he hadn't before. A home isn't just a financial asset. It's the result of years of work, sacrifice, and love. One evening, several months later, Ethan came by the house alone. He stood on the porch for a moment before knocking. When I opened the door, he looked nervous. "Hey, Mom." "Hi." He stepped inside, slowly glancing around the living room. "Feels the same," he said. "In some ways." We sat down at the kitchen table together. After a moment, he spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened." "That's good." I was wrong. I didn't interrupt. I let money and pressure change the way I looked at things, he continued. Madison and I both did. He paused. "And I hurt you." The honesty in his voice was real, and that mattered. "I'm still your mother," I said quietly. "That doesn't change." He nodded. "But things will be different now, won't they?" "Yes." "Because of what happened?" "Yes." He took a deep breath. "I understand." For a while, we just sat there. Then he smiled slightly. "You know something funny?" "What?" "I used to think that house was the most valuable thing you had. And now..." He looked around the kitchen. "Now I realize the most valuable thing was the life you built inside it." Those words meant more to me than he probably realized, because that had been the lesson all along. The house was never just wood and brick. It was dignity, boundaries, and the quiet strength it sometimes takes to protect what you've built. And if there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's that protecting your home isn't just about the walls around you. It's about protecting your self-respect, too. After everything that happened in this story, there's one important lesson I want to leave with you. Sometimes the people closest to us forget where the boundaries are. Not always because they are evil, but because comfort, pressure, and money can slowly blur the lines between love and entitlement. Family should never be built on manipulation, and kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean you don't love your family. Sometimes, it simply means you respect yourself enough to protect what you've worked your whole life to build. If you've ever experienced something similar conflict with family over money, property, or trust, you're not alone. These situations are more common than people realize, and they're never easy. What matters most is remembering that your dignity and your boundaries are just as important as your generosity. I'd really love to hear your thoughts about this story. Do you think Barbara did the right thing by refusing to sign the house over to her son? Or would you have handled the situation differently? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and it's always fascinating to hear different perspectives from people around the world. And if this story moved you or made you think, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps more people discover these stories, and it means a lot to me to share them with you. Where are you watching from today? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to know. Until next time, take care of yourself. And never be afraid to stand up for your own home.